Hi, my name is Ahmed Riaz, and I'm an experience designer. And what that means is I get to go to work every day and play with Post-it notes and markers and try to envision what the future looks like for some of the leading companies in the world. And so what I thought I'd start today with was just kind of pop up in my brain and share with you guys where I think some of these ideas and inspirations come from. And so for me, they can come from lots of different spaces. They can come from like the slow burn idea that's been growing in your mind over years and years and years. They can come from research that you're doing. They can come from all kinds of like inspiration and ahas. And so you start to see these connections between different things. But the truth is, there's also this other layer on top of those, which is the layer of culture. And I think for me personally, this is something we often ignore, but for me personally, it's one of those layers that the greatest amount of ideas come from. It's this layer of culture, this pattern that you have on top, that helps you think about things in such a different way. And so here's a metaphor that helps me understand culture a little bit better. So I like to think about it like a bonfire. And so when I'm talking about culture, it's not just cultures of geographical cultures or different places in the world. It's really the idea of, it could be professional cultures, like the medical culture versus like a engineering culture. It could be a culture of like the east side versus the west side of a city. And what it feels like when you first look at culture is that it's something up close to you, this bonfire that you're standing next to. And you're really up close to it, and it warms you up, and maybe there's people around you talking, and it feels very familiar. But if you're confident enough, you can step back a little bit. And as you do, you start to see the penumbra of the culture. You start to see the outline of what's happening around the culture. And maybe you start seeing, what the shape of it is. And once your eyes adjust, you start to see what's happening around off in the distance. You see the other cultures moving across and changing and morphing, because that's what cultures do. And if you're really lucky, maybe one of those cultures will overlap over where you are. And this area is the cultural catalyst area. This is where, if you're sitting, you're able to connect what's happening across different cultures. You're able to act as a bridge across different cultures. And so, in my mind, these are the three cultures that I'm connected to. The culture of Pakistan, the culture of Saudi Arabia, and the culture of the United States. Certainly three cultures that are colliding against each other right now. And you can think of this in many different ways. You can think of this as something where there can be a lot of strife, or you can think of this as an area for great inspiration. This is where the cultural catalyst is the strongest. This is where that bonfire really sparks up. And those sparks, each of those sparks are ideas. And so if I dive into one of those cultures, if I dive into the culture of Pakistan, this man sits. And this is my grandfather. He was a professional poet, a very creative person. In fact, he was the poet laureate of Pakistan. He wrote the national anthem. And it's me trying to look like him. My glasses are not as cool, I can tell. But that's not important. What's important is we have exactly the same nose. And the reason that's important is somehow, as I was growing up as a child, I got this inside my head that somehow I had the genetic right to be creative, as false as that idea was. That in a space where creativity wasn't really cultivated, I somehow had the ability to be creative because there was precedent. And I took that precedent and I ran away with it. And so I felt I owed something to what this man cared about. I owed something back to the culture that he was connected to. There was this string connecting me back there through him. And so I thought, how do I give back to that culture? How do I give back to the culture of Pakistan? And so this is a photograph from after the floods in 2010 in Pakistan. And then, I'm a designer, I make things. And I thought, what? Maybe what I need to do is I need to make something beautiful. Maybe I could make lighting for disaster relief, right? Like flood lighting. Maybe I could make like a disaster tent. And I realized all these things that I was making had this word like disaster and extreme, and I realized that wasn't the thing I wanted to make. What I wanted to make was I wanted to make these people feel like they had a hope for the future. And the best way I knew to do that was, as a designer, give them the feeling that they had control over what they made, that they had the tools to make their own future. And so, working with a group in California College of Arts, we decided to work on this, to teach the design process to everyone around the world. So we started really big, and we were like, wow, that's maybe too much. Let's narrow it down. And we said, you know what, let's focus on kids. We want to teach the design process to all kids, everywhere in the world. And as soon as we did that, something else came through. Some connection was made where kids don't care about process, they care about play. And so the word design play came through there, and it really stuck in our heads, and we're like, you know, that's what we want to do. We want to teach kids design play. And as we do that, we're really lucky. As we started to investigate this, we realized that kids already were doing elements of design play, which was they were already exploring, whether it was a kid in Austin, Texas, or a kid in Africa. They were already drawing, whether they were doing it on paper or in the dirt. And they were already making things, whether they were making Legos or sandcastles. And so again, we were here with these kids after a flood in Pakistan making things, and the joy that it gave them to make things. The joy, it was clearly on their faces when they were investigating what it was like to try something. And if it didn't work, that was fine. And so we ourselves went out there and started prototyping and iterating. And so some of the things we initially thought was, you know, what if we had a kit, some kind of thing, a little satchel that kids could carry around with them, and it would have these tools that they could pull out and start to use, these lenses they could look at the world. Maybe they would have a little book that they could kind of write their ideas in. Or maybe there was like a storybook or a video or a cartoon that could be translated in different languages. Those are some of the things that we started prototyping. And we took those prototypes and we took them to real schools. And when we took them inside real schools, we realized a few very interesting things. One of the things we realized is when we went inside the school, we had set up the activity, it was during recess, and we thought, you know, some kids are going to go out into the real recess and some are going to stay and play with our prototype. And all of them came back. All of them came back because they were excited to play, and it was a treat for them, which made me think it wasn't something they did every time, and they're still asking for permission. They kept looking up at us and saying, can I do this? Can I draw outside here? And we were like, yeah, of course you can. You're a kid, you can do whatever you want. And what was really interesting was it felt like they needed a facilitator. They really couldn't do this by themselves. They needed someone there to be a guide, to give them permission. Give them permission much like my grandfather being there gave me permission. And so we came up with this design play framework. And the elements of the framework, if applied, anyone can teach design and encourage design. And so the first part of the framework is find it. And find it is taking a design principle and turning it into kid language. And so what we did is we took the principle of research and ethnography and turned it into find it, really just investigating and finding things out. And then we had another principle of sketch it, which is trying things out and playing with it, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. It's that quality of just putting something together. And then make it. Make it was really more about the craftsmanship, the dedication it takes to make something real, the dedication it takes to actually make something that lasts and go through the entirety of the process. So imagine, if you will, a kid making a fort or a tree house. Really, it takes that craftsmanship to put it together. And then share it. Share it was really key, we found, because all of these didn't really matter if the kid couldn't communicate out his ideas. If the kid couldn't say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and these are my ideas, really clearly communicated out was very important. And finally, redo it. Redo it is the ability to take any of these and do them again and again. The iterative quality of trying things out and being okay with failing. It's almost like the designer quality of falling and rolling, you know. You learn how to fall and you learn to try, and it's okay. You're professional failures in some ways. So we took all of this and we translated it into another language just to see if it translated well. And one thing we found was because we'd simplified these concepts to their very core, we'd polished them down, they became really easy to translate. And here they're translated into Urdu, which is one of the predominant languages in Pakistan. And an example is make it becomes banao, and redo it becomes dobara karo. And it was working. It was the concepts were translating. And the other thing that we thought would be really interesting is overlaying that with the cultural catalyst. So when you have that cultural catalyst kind of overlaid, it's where those concepts really come alive. And you end up in places that you wouldn't have otherwise ended up. And so we did all this, and I was still feeling itchy because I wanted to work with something physical, right? That's it's a designer trait. And so we thought, this framework, it's all nice and it's all very ethereal, but we've got to test it. We've got to make something real. We've got to put it out there. And so what we did is we created this, Adventures in Design. And what it is it's a storybook. And what it does is it gives kids that facilitator through this character called Design Moose. And what Design Moose has is he has a little pouch that he can pull out any of these principles that we talked about, and he does activities like finding it. And if he has ideas, they kind of populate in his horns over his head. And we thought it was just really, you could give this content in an episodic way so that kids can start using it again and again, and really reinforce and give them permission through this character. They can start thinking, wow, I want to be like Design Moose. I remember this from an early age, and it's a meme that you can throw out into the world. And so one of the concepts along with that was, when you buy a book or when you buy one of these episodic concepts, regardless of what medium it's in, whether it's on the iPad or as this physical book, we'd give a book to a kid somewhere across the world. And so this is the translated Urdu version of that book. And the other cool thing is each page of the book, it's sort of a build your own adventure, something that kids can share across cultures. They can see what someone else came up with and build on these ideas. And so you have this really nice virtuous system where kids are feeding into the shared community of ideas. They're feeding back into each other, and as the system is providing for itself, and the ideas are being shared, and kids can see what a kid in the US can see what a kid in maybe Africa is coming up with. And they may have completely different solutions for that same concept. And so one of the stories that we had was the dragon in the doghouse. So this dragon comes in, he's stuck in the doghouse, and Design Moose wakes up and he's like, what's this dragon doing in my doghouse? And he starts to investigate it. And eventually he finds out, his really bad teeth. And that's why he's been kicked out by all the other dragons. And he has to solve that problem using the design principles. And I can see very easily the solution for that being completely different across the world. So if you're in the Middle East, there's this thing called miswak, which is sort of a twig that you can use to clean your teeth. And I can imagine growing miswak plants around the dragon as one of the solutions for a kid in the Middle East. But a kid in the United States might have a very cool, funky toothbrush headgear or something that the dragon can wear. So it's all kinds of different solutions like that, and seeing what other people come up with and mixing that becomes really interesting. So what's next? Where do you take this? What we decided to do is we took the framework and we made it Creative Commons. We've opened it up. And we have an example that sort of works, and we've tested it out and it's working. But what we're really, really interested in is seeing what everyone else can come up with. Using these principles, you can come up with all kinds of different things. You can create a curriculum here in Texas. You can use the same principles and start making toys in a village in Africa. And it becomes very, very interesting. And all we ask is that when you do that, you share back with the community. You go back to the website, and you share back what's happening and what you guys are investigating. And that's it. Thank you.
Ahmed, I have a question for you. You seem to be challenging the famous Maslow's hierarchy model, where the base layer is physical survival needs, and as you progress up the layers, you address more and more of the self-actualization needs. But it sounds like what you're saying is you're challenging that you must go in a sequence from bottom to up. Because Maslow's hierarchy says people will not care about higher levels until the lower level is first satisfied. But it sounds like what you're saying is people in extreme environments, sure, they need food, lodging, sanitation, but they also need to address their spiritual and emotional needs. Sounds like you're addressing more than one layer at a time. It's not just going from the bottom, food, water, shelter, and then going more towards social needs and then self-actualization.
I think what's really interesting is that by addressing the top of the pyramid, and you're certainly right, that's the way it is it gives them this light, this sense of hope, and then they can start climbing up faster. right? If you're just focused on the bottom, you're kind of going to stay in the bottom. If you're focused on the second, you're going to spend your life staying on the second row. But if you see something up there, you start to investigate it. And if you take children and you inspire them to start looking up, that's really all it's doing. It's kind of moving their gaze up. Then they can be inspired to move up faster. And so I don't think it breaks it completely, but what it does is it shifts their gaze.
So what you're working here has implications for all people doing development work. Because sometimes people may say, all we need to provide them are mosquito nets. Or all we need is clean water for them. But maybe we need to take a more of a holistic view and address more of the social and spiritual needs as well.
Yeah, I mean, if they can not only just get mosquito nets, but envision a world where they can move away from the mosquitoes or solve the mosquito problem altogether, envisioning that world is the first step. And knowing in small, tiny ways that they can get to that. So a kid that makes maybe, let's say, a football out of like trash, right? like plastic, they can, once they've done that, they know, oh, I can make something and I can do something. So that's part of the puzzle. And the other part of the puzzle is imagining a world of the future. And so if they know what the world of the future looks like, and they know they can take small incremental steps, and you encourage that kind of activity, eventually they'll be able to move out of that mosquito environment altogether.
So if development work focuses on addressing just the most basic needs, we're sending the signal to them that that's all they should be concerned about themselves. That is the totality of the world. Mosquito is bad, stay away from mosquitoes, as opposed to saying, envision yourself, maybe helping yourself, lifting yourself beyond just mosquito infestation.
Right, and also it's giving the message that mosquitoes are bad, you're going to get mosquito nets, and you're going to get mosquito nets. You're not going to create them. Someone is going to provide them to you.
You're helpless.
You're helpless, and I'm going to help you out. And if you're given that feeling from a young age, you're going to continue to have that feeling throughout your growing years.
I'm also curious, you mentioned that when you tested the program with some students in the US, some of the kids asked you, may I have permission to draw? What age was that?
These were 7-year-olds that were trying.
My goodness. What happened? Why would they? My goodness, that's shocking to me.
Yeah.
At that young age, they would think they may not play. They have to ask permission to be themselves.
And permission to like really just draw and make something. You know, we had this activity where we had a cloud on one side and an elephant on the other, and they had to kind of create a new animal. And they were trying to find the right answer.
Wow.
And there wasn't a right answer. And that was the thing, is like thinking without looking for the right answer is something that we need to continue to encourage. And say, you know what, if you're going to deal with the problems of today, there's lots of thinking that you need to do that doesn't have one right answer. What
your work does has enormous implications for our country's survival economically, because I've read recently in a survey from ITF that the US, although right now we're still number 2 or 3 in innovation worldwide, in terms of progress, our rate of progress is number 40 out of 40 countries surveyed. So our pace of innovation is actually dead last amongst 40 countries surveyed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ahmed, pleasure.